Well, I thought that this was the obvious topic for the most bombed hotel in Europe on fireworks night. Can you imagine? I'm going to, in this session, really kind of highlight just a few of the hydrocarbon remedies that are explosive. It's a very big group of remedies, and I'm also going to talk about why it can be very helpful in clinical practice. Look at where carbon is in the periodic table and summarize the theme of the hydrocarbons. And everything I say is with great thanks to Roger Morrison. And if you haven't got his book, do buy it. He, of course, was a chemist before he became a doctor. So if there are any chemists in the room, please be quiet, all right? Because I'm going to, I don't mean it, I'm going to try and explain a bit of the chemistry. So if I do make mistakes, you can let me know. So what are the hydrocarbons? They are carbon-based compounds, mainly from petroleum. And I'm going to show you a very short video because actually the substance in nature that has had the biggest impact on us as human beings is very likely petroleum. And the growth of petrochemicals, plastics, polymers, paints, dyes, solvents, all of the pharmaceutical agents rely on the petroleum industry. And it was quite interesting when Trevor took the medical students to a pharmaceutical plant close to us in Avonmouth. The whole time everyone was dressed in kind of protective gear with crossbones all over the boxes of drugs. And I think that kind of tells you something about how powerful some of these agents are. Carbon has cyclical and non-cyclical compounds, and we're going to just touch on the benzene ring and why that might have specific characteristics, but also the carbon, which is less reactive. So you saw that lovely video of The Office with Bob's calc carb, and you saw the carbon elements there. So the guy was overweight, passive, non-reactive, yeah? But we're going to see how these other parts of some of these hydrocarbon compounds create changes so that you're not always seeing the face of carbon, you're seeing other themes. And I just put that up so that you get a sense of really, you know, what a dirty substance petroleum is in kind of the pharmacological sense, because it's got so many substances within it. Petroleum or crude oil is naturally occurring, it's naturally flammable. But in the time of Hahnemann, the petroleum would have just been kind of oozing up out at certain cracks in the rocks. But it was way back in 1546 when petroleum was first described by a German mineralogist.
The far left would have you believe the Bush administration lied to get us into war for oil.
You heard here on this program tonight that we went into this effort to control the oil, which is not true.
And we did it, not for oil, you know, we did it out of trying to give these people a chance.
Oil. Is it about oil?
This is not about that. This is about saving lives by protecting the American people.
It does not relate to oil. I mean, it just plain doesn't.
This is the American dream of freedom on wheels.
For the United States, oil was once a source of power. More than any other vital material, oil was central to the American way of life.
What it comes down to is that the oil industry has to please Mrs. Martin and millions just like her. Already today, she's used some 87 petroleum products, including the plastic bacon wrapper and the wax of the milk carton.
Since the onset of the petroleum age in 1860, the United States has been the leading consumer of petroleum, and we remain so today. We have about 5% of the world's population. We consume 1/4 of the world's petroleum, about 20 million barrels per day out of total world consumption of 80 million barrels. But until you really investigate this, you don't appreciate just how deeply our economy is dependent on oil. 98% of our transportation energy comes from petroleum products. We couldn't move goods around our country without oil. Our entire agricultural industry is highly mechanized and dependent on petroleum for herbicides and pesticides and fertilizers. And then if you think of the million products that are made from petrochemicals, all the plastics and pharmaceuticals and cosmetics and paints and lubricants, all of these industries rest on an abundant supply of petroleum. And that's why when petroleum becomes scarce or the price of petroleum rises, the entire economy is affected.
So we're going to look at some of these themes that have come through: fuels, combustion, movement. These are some of the remedies. And I'm also going to mention the dream proving that we did as part of the academic program at Bristol. Now, some of you may disagree with dream provings, but so much rich information came through. I thought it was worth sharing it, because what you'll see is the themes of that dream proving then very closely relate to the themes that Morrison will talk about, the whole hydrocarbon group. So I mentioned Hahnemann. It was one of the remedies that he did a proving of. And the idea to dig deep for oil came with the first oil well in 1859. So how do we translate the kind of the flabby, passive nature of the calc-carb child with this powerful energy we're describing within petroleum? So one of the main themes of the proving was of travel, and you just saw that in the video. Travel by bus, tube, train, car, even a space pod, but travel under pressure, moving fast, being late, too many people pushed into one vehicle. And it relates, I think, quite well to Jonathan's talk about what are we finding here in terms of the levels of anxiety. Mental health has never been so bad, particularly for young people. And we are finding ourselves increasingly under pressure. We saw again people on the tube, on the train. This was interesting because the issue of animals, how we protect the earth, how we protect animals, came through. We are like animals with gates being pushed in on us, being penned in. And we're going to see how that quality of carbon is to feel penned in or tied in or restricted. And we'll talk a little bit about the vital sensation of the carbon. Again, we see we are all trying to squeeze in to go on an outing. I was driving a car and there wasn't enough room for everyone. We were in a race or a competition where I performed much better than I thought I would do. And one of the themes you're going to see is value, self-esteem. How do we place value on ourselves? That benzene ring, which is so much a part of petroleum and its derivatives, seems to relate to someone who finds their value through mental effort. So it was wonderful yesterday for Jackie to take us to the heart space. I don't know how many of you started to relax or feel able to move away from this brain of ours that's constantly moving. So I'd also like to suggest that some of these hydrocarbon remedies can be very useful for ADHD and autism, and we'll look a little bit about why that might be the case. But also crucially in cancer, we're going to look at the fact that so many of these agents are carcinogens. And this theme of travel, also there was a theme of brutality, and I think you could see that. I don't know how you felt in that movie of watching those oil reservoirs just on fire, the waste, the inhumanity to Iraq and some of the states there in the Middle East. But here was a dream. It had the feeling of a British gangster film, like Lock, Stock and Two Smoking Barrels. Dark outside, I don't remember where we were parked. We were discussing murdering someone in quite graphic detail. It was to be a particularly violent killing, and it involved guns. I awoke suddenly sweating. And again, fascinating that this theme of sweating will come into looking at some of these remedies, like glonoin and petroleum. This is interesting. A hand is near my mouth, and I bite down on the edge of it hard, repeatedly. I've never inflicted more pain on a fellow human being. So again, I was struck by a young man I was seeing with very severe autism last week, and I've given him tarantula with some good effect. I have to say, I hadn't been to Heine Frei's lectures, so we might rethink there. But one of the things, that I thought about was, could this be a hydrocarbon remedy? Because one of the things his mum describes, that in these units where they see a lot of people with autism, they now have what's called the squeeze pod. So when the child is becoming overstimulated and therefore anxious and therefore aggressive, they put them in a pod and squeeze them back into what essentially to me sounded like the womb, a safe place where you're tightly bound and you can feel a sense of security. But what was interesting is he had bitten so many carers down to the bone that you can imagine what was happening with the team of carers. Once you've been to A&E, you just don't feel like going back. Do you know what I mean? So tarantula had helped in that his carers could stick with him now. But what that also reflects is a level of pathology for young people with autism and ADHD growing, cancer growing. This was fascinating. Remember, no one taking the remedy knew it was petroleum. I was at a conference with a potential American president, yeah? And you saw all the presidents there, didn't you, in that movie, negotiating the power, the money, yeah? Possibly Obama and McCain. There was a beautiful lady sat in the audience. She was wearing a long skirt with a split all the way up one side. She was there to try and assassinate one of the candidates and had 6 daggers. So again, we see this element of kind of mistrust as well about what happens when people want power. And there was also superpower. And we'll see this coming back in some of the clinical cases. You saw the image there of Osama bin Laden, but the idea of war and superpower. The other thing that came through strongly in this dream proving was technology. People had dreams, laptops, mobile phones, computers blowing up, and a sense of going back in time to more primitive time. And there was one prover who dreamt of the medieval times, the midwinter, the chill winter. This was a very fascinating dream. It involves being in a poor northern town where the coal mines are still open. Remember, this person doesn't know she's on petroleum. And there are deep mine shafts. I go down into a working class but reasonably affluent sitting room. Nice furniture, glowing fire. Next, I descend as if in a lift down to a poorer sitting room, less comfortable, less money, slightly colder, but the miners are still hospitable. Then I descend to a lower level. Everyone is very poor. Almost the 20s or 30s depression. I think there might be a bird in a cage, and remember that because that's interestingly going to come through. And I have to say that with Jonathan's case yesterday, with the person who did so well on Pigeon, prior to that when he was feeling tied and bound and restricted, and I think there was a sensational dreams of paint, I was considering, could this be a hydrocarbon? And there you see a fire full of slag dust with barely a spark, no sense of warmth. So think of carbo veg, yeah? We give it as the corpse reviver. This is where energy falls very, very low, yeah? And people who need these remedies might talk about a fuel tank having nothing in there, yeah? And we're going to see fainting as another theme, where the person's energy goes. And what might we do when our energy goes? We might eat, and we might eat carbohydrate and sweet things, and then we might find that we're putting on weight. So this theme of metabolism is very, very key. And also the theme of anger. And we're going to see how, for example, petroleum has perspiration from anger. But actually that theme within the hydrocarbons of sitting on really a bit of literally a minefield, yeah? And then there was weakness, confusion, and cyanosis. And this element of confusion is very important. So for petroleum, we know that they lose their way in well-known streets, yeah? They also, interestingly, have a feeling of being scattered around the bed as if their body parts are separating. But what we do know is there's weakness for memory. So these are very important remedies for chronic fatigue syndrome. And you can imagine multiple chemical sensitivity. The problem is these people are sensitive to these petrochemical elements that have been unleashed really relentlessly in the last 50 to 60 years. This is another interesting dream. There are 3 corpulent people who are blue and dressed in boiler suits. So again, you see this sense of the workman. They look like family, and I wonder why common people are there. They cannot support themselves, so have to lean their foreheads against each other, this great weakness. I am trying to concentrate, but I slip in and out of consciousness. So the other group within this group, and we'll see the theme of anesthesia and why anesthesia might be so important and how anesthesia fits with addiction as well, because we want to try and remove ourselves from this realm of suffering. So this is an important theme that will come up again and again. Suddenly there is a huge explosion, and the words, "the power of the dark void," become almost visible. And I wake with a start, terrified, and have to lie very close to my husband to get support from him, so that I will not be alone in the dark void. Remember, for those of us who are interested in the kingdom approaches, we'll often be looking for words that might relate to the mineral kingdom: stability, instability, support, unsupported. So it's always a complex of understanding that allows us to more accurately match a medicine to any individual. But here we've got that phrase, getting support, yeah? And then the protection of wildlife, and the theme particularly, it seems, of birds. In our garden, the birds had been attacked. They were clustered together, frightened, blood splattered everywhere. A dog, like an animal, slunk off, carrying bird wings in his mouth. I felt I had to rescue the birds. So again, did you see the theme in that, just the 3 minutes I played of that really interesting movie called Blood and Oil? And there's a book to follow that. But the idea of we have to do these things like bomb the hell out of people in order to protect ourselves. Yeah? So again, the theme of security and insecurity. Responsibility. Now, for those of you, again, who use the more modern miasmatic structures, someone who has to be a superhero who's extremely responsible, what miasm are we thinking of? Cancer. And what about the miasm where you're thinking of lots of travel, lots of movement? Tubercular. So my life's made a bit easier in the cancer clinic because I only really need to deal with a few miasms. If someone needs a remedy from the psoric miasm, which is a less desperate, more hopeful state, I'm a happy bunny, because most of the time I'm working with desperation, heaviness, yeah? And funnily enough, I then feel responsible, yeah? So we have to be careful as we work in these areas that we're also able to remove ourselves from that sense of responsibility. And then there was the theme of exploitation and money, scheming, how to make money. So poverty, the fear of poverty, yeah? The idea that we haven't got enough, that we have to accumulate. can be a powerful energy within petroleum. Because actually, if you look globally, we have enough resources to care for everyone on the planet. But we often live with a degree of fear that means that we start to accumulate. And it's a bit like an oil well. You keep it in one area. So just to summarize those themes: exhaustion, weakness, depletion, disorientation, confusion, vacancy, thoughts disappearing. Then we've got the theme of fire, burning, explosion. As I focus in on just 3 remedy states, we'll have a look at that. Passivity and indifference. I was, that office scene again where he just, I don't know, I can't be bothered to answer your questions, yeah? And the frustration. And then this theme of being caught in the past. Has anyone ever been on a plane flight where they feel they took about 2 days to catch up? So in a way, with petroleum, we are time traveling. We're being pushed forward into places that we couldn't possibly have reached on our legs, particularly. And then we've got this theme of materialism, exploitation, cruelty, money, and poverty. And then this idea of superpower. And between 2 worlds, anesthesia, and then travel. So these themes will come back. So you may remember, I think it wasn't last year in Glasgow, but the year before, I presented this case of a young woman with very bad acne, very unhealthy, pale skin that didn't heal very well. And also she had recurrent abscesses. So she was one of those many people in our NHS services having to use a lot of antibiotics. And I think that we could be so useful trying to reduce antibiotic use. Interestingly, she was a jeweler, and she had a bit of silver that had spun off what she was working with and lodged itself quite deeply in her nose. So when I incorrectly prescribed silica, she was chuffed to bits because it hurled out this bit of silver that had been in her nose for 5 years. So she kind of stuck with me while I tried to work out what remedy she needed. But let's just see what she says. My sweating is outrageous. I can sit at rest and have profuse beads of sweat. And I notice she has this pale, clammy skin, almost grey, with sweat on her forehead. My hands and feet are hot now, but sometimes they are freezing. I have a ridiculous metabolism. I'm always hungry, and I can't put weight on. I had a sore throat and vomiting and lost a stone. I'm not sure about my bones and stuff. I fainted suddenly after a brandy and Coke, then fainted again. So this theme of fainting is strong for the hydrocarbons. Yeah, and what was I regretting at 4 a.m. this morning? Alcohol, yeah? So you drink enough alcohol and you will actually render yourself comatose. But for some people, they can be very sensitive to any alcohol and might fate with that. So I asked her to tell me about the abscesses. I couldn't walk. It was horrible, burning. I couldn't put weight on it. It's excruciating, extremely hot and angry. And I often think of, these kind of abscesses for suppressed anger. And the theme of suppression in cancer is very, very important. If you can't think of a remedy for someone, just try and help them to work with habits around more self-expression. So there's a lovely remedy, Hecla lava, which has lots of magnesium and other elements in it. But again, it's this idea of having to have sat on anger for a long time. And her anger was related to her sister's boyfriend, who she felt was abusive to her sister, who she loved very much. And she'd said, I feel so angry with him, I'd like to throw him down a mine shaft, which I thought was really curious that she could be that specific about what she'd like to do with him. So these abscesses are real problems. What about the acne? Horrible, ugly. Now, this is curious because you might think about the leprosy miasm, particularly if it was overlaid with themes of disgust or feeling excluded. But Morrison does bring forward the theme of grossness in the hydrocarbons, and you will see this coming through. I had this pale skin with angry red spots. It was uneven. Now, with this case, it takes a very long time to show it because she almost doesn't respond to any question. There's a long, long pause, a bit like the chap in the office yesterday. And so I was really, really working hard to stay with it. And one of the things that I often feel is bored. Yeah? It's like a slowness of reactivity, which for me is an impatient nitrate-containing mineral. I find it really tough, but it's a good feedback to me. Oh, this could be someone who needs something with quite a lot of carbon in it. But I kept going and kept going. What about the sweating? Pain or nerves will make me sweat. My body is freaking out, breaking out. My brain has gone totally dead. If I sweat because of a warmth, it is different, but any extreme emotion will make me sweat. If I get angry, I will sweat, like in an argument. And this sensitivity to quarrels we're going to see is key for the remedy that really helped her. And that sweat was smelly. So I kept on going and getting information out of her. But what about your dreams? I'm walking along the beach and I know something is about to happen. This fear that something bad is going to happen. A massive amount of water. What's the feeling in the dream? Absolute fear. Nothing you can do with something that big. Just tell me more. You must get away, grab someone, run. An urgency to get away. I remember dreaming that me, Mum, and my sister were holding on to each other. The windows were shaking. And this is where, for the first time in the case, a gesture comes in. It was buffeting. Yeah? What is this buffeting? It is a big shock, a big boom, buffeting, all the pressures changing. It's the shock. It makes you jump. It will wake you up. Tell me about the shock. It's like a backdraft, a suction of air. And we're going to come back to where carbon is in the periodic table. But just think of that moment where the waters break in the womb and then your pressure's dropped, and then in a minute you're going to come into a very unknown space. And we're going to look at how that fear of the unknown. So you saw in Heine's case where he prescribed Calcarea carbonicum, this fear of the unknown was strong for that child coming through. But what this made me feel is that it looked like it could be a hydrocarbon with the sweating and the fainting. And now this confirmation about this boom, explosive, shock, backdraft, yeah? And I gave her petroleum. So she said in follow-up, my skin feels better and I've had fewer abscesses, but my skin is always worse in the summer. So one of the things that Heine's work is doing with Berningshausen is really rooting us back into these generalities that can be our anchor points. So all I did was say, tell me about being worse in summer. Well, I remember at a festival, I was walking along carrying an umbrella because of the sun, not because of the rain. So for me, that's curious, you know. But the sun still got through onto my head. I was lying down and my friends were pouring water on me to cool me down. It was like my brain was swelling, like zigzags, like my brain was going to burst out of my skull. So what do you think she needed? Glonoin, absolutely. So lovely case where, you know, just sitting with it and allowing her to tell me what the answer might be. Yeah? So here we've got glonoin and the structure with these nitrate groups. So you've got not a carbon ring, but you've got a carbon chain. And one of the things that I realized over the years of working in cancer is that I was often seeing a lot of nitrate salts. Nitrogen kind of places us in this realm of the cancer miasm, and I'll talk a little bit more about that. But for glonoin, this means that they are highly reactive, explosive, sensitive to jarring, to anything that might set them off. So a partner for someone who needs glonoin might talk about walking on eggshells, not knowing when the person might just trigger off, yeah? And fascinatingly, this was Alfred Nobel, who all the Nobel Prizes, even the recent one to, what's his name? Yeah, Bob Dylan, is based on the growth of dynamite, because this gentleman's brother was killed while they were working on Glonoin. And you can see this guy, he looks serious and responsible, doesn't he? And he found that its shock sensitivity could be reduced to safe levels. When I say safe, it still kills people. But anyway, mixing it with earth, hence this gelatinous dynamite. And what's really interesting is that he developed angina, which then had to be treated with nitroglycerine. Yeah? So he was proving this nitroglycerine. And I think not only physically, but also psychologically, because he wanted to make sure that the wealth that he developed through the development of dynamite went into good deeds. So I'm just going to play another minute of that film, just in relationship to this theme of Glonoin and then a relative of dynamite. But before I do that, I just want to emphasize this sensitivity to quarrels, this feeling in the nitrogen state, particularly when you've got 3 of them there in your compound, that something could happen and tension is building. And what you have to do is control tension. But when the pressure builds too strongly, then the feeling is to burst out. So a young man with ADHD, his mother said that plane flight was impossible because he'd spend the whole time trying to jump out of the plane. And I said to her, what do you think is going on? She said, it's like he just feels so restricted, he wants to burst out, yeah? And his ADHD was significantly helped, and she also was able to plane travel with him. And we know that there's this very strong aggravation from the sun. Don't forget as well that what we saw for that young woman was unhealthy skin healing poorly. And fascinating to find out that the sailors used to put gunpowder into their wounds to accelerate healing. And I found that the hydrocarbon groups, particularly some of the nitrates containing, are very good for wound healing. So think about it for hidradenitis suppurativa, where they're getting abscesses, but also for wound healing, you know, when you want to just accelerate wound healing. Yeah?
The oil flow from the Persian Gulf is so essential to American security and well-being that we'll do anything necessary to protect it.
If power-hungry communists should either falsely or correctly estimate that the Middle East is inadequately defended, they might be tempted to use open measures of armed attack. If so, that would start a chain of circumstances which would almost surely involve the United States in great military action.
These sorts of brazen announcements that the United States would use force to protect its interests continued right through to the Vietnam War.
We Americans are a do-it-yourself people. We're an impatient people. Instead of teaching someone else to do a job, we like to do it ourselves.
So I wanted to play that bit because I also think that petroleum has very much contributed to the interventionist model, that you don't wait around until someone slowly heals themselves or works out what to do. You fix it, you intervene. So these forces on us are strong. Let's just talk about carbon and that lovely state when you're in the womb and everything is safe and quiet and known, and then you have to make this transition. So you can see in the second row a strong theme of separation that Sholton has really helped us develop, and Rajan as well. Carbon is there in the center, yeah, and we can see why it might very strongly relate to the cancer miasm, because it's at the summit of that row. And here you've got nitrogen that also has a theme of separation, and also of how do I separate in order to build myself. into someone with identity, which is in row 3. And then when I have my identity, how do I build myself into someone who can work or have a role or defend and protect, like in row 4? And then in row 5, how do I perform? And all the time you're building your confidence, you're building your weight in the world until eventually you become a heavyweight in the gold series, yeah? And you might become a politician or a world leader. The problem for row 2 up there is that they've not got much structure. They've not got very much in the way of their sense of self. And that can be a real challenge for people, and why we might find vulnerabilities for people who need remedies from this group. So fetal life and the birth process. Can I be independent now that I'm going into a new world alone? A state between life and death, awake and asleep, familiar and strange. So very interesting, again, just coming back to the dream proving to see, I returned to an old house, the doorway's blocked off, I couldn't find my way, I was lost, confused, familiar, but I could not remember. So this familiarity is important. Then we see it again, familiar places, return to cinema, trapped in chair, surprise, familiar, weird. And we'll look at a little, just at the end, I'll mention camphora, which has this, again, is one of the hydrocarbons with a lot of terpene in it. But what we know here is that people, when they're feeling unsure, lacking in confidence, are going to have difficulty pushing themselves into the unknown. So it's really worth remembering that for some of the carbon remedies. So with the vital sensation, carbons are under pressure as they come through the birthing canal. They can feel restricted, tied, bound, wanting to separate, an intolerance of tight clothing, suffocation and oppression. And that's just for carbon. That isn't even for carbon plus nitrogen, because of course you'll see that nitrogen kind of emphasized. And they can be dull and non-reactive, or they can be hyperreactive. And some of the hydrocarbons can also oscillate between two states, like carbonaceum sulfuratum and others. And you'll see this theme of shock. So this is a case that I want to discuss in a little bit more detail, because it really perplexed me for a while. And these are just some phrases that I picked out from the first time I had a long consultation. This is a lady with recurrent ovarian cancer. Poor prognosis when she comes to see me, having recurred about 4 times. But what's interesting is that every time her cancer comes back, it's preceded by a lot of inflammation with a rise in her what's called C-reactive protein. That's unusual. And she gets a lot of joint pains. It also suggests there was a dynamic quality to her state. But she says, I hate feeling I can't escape. If someone shuts me in and locks the door, I feel underground and I need to take a deep breath. How did I make sense of this dream when I saw her so many years ago? She dreams of going alone into fields and is left in the middle of nowhere. She also dreamt of the president of the USA. So quite hard to put this, image of someone very powerful with someone very lost and alone and a bit confused. She felt that she should send a conquer in the war against Iraq. So that's interesting. She describes herself as a terrier that won't let go. She's persistent. Children are vulnerable and can't speak for themselves. And she has a very senior role in Ofsted, going around and checking schools are looking after children. I feel I've not got air, that I have to break out of it. They're not harming me, but I'll have to push out. There is a barrier between my space and freedom. I love trees. I love to see them move in the wind. They are natural. They haven't been tamed. Wildflowers are perfect. I hate caged animals, anything enclosed like the wren. So I have to admit I did give her a few bird remedies along the way until I understood what she needed. I dream of protecting animals. Dogs don't have to be in a cage. They can enjoy companionship, but wild animals need freedom. And I think you heard Jonathan say yesterday about the realm of nonsense. that we get into, you'll find that we get into an even deeper level where we've no idea what's going on. What's interesting is that she does have these joint pains as the inflammation builds up, and then invariably she needs further chemotherapy. And this was coming again and again. So I asked her about this joint pain, this presenting complaint. It's like an inflammation. Something is accumulating. What is this accumulating? You notice I'm just sticking with the words. It's trying to, if you know about Rogerian sensitive listening skills, you just stay with what the person is presenting to you, even if you've no idea what they're talking about. You look like you're interested, though. As soon as I move, it will disperse, but it's like something is hanging on. There's no strength in my ankles or in my knees. Just describe it more, like something's in the way. I want to move it out of the way of the joint. No flexibility. It is like it is stifled, a pressure. A good walk will keep me flexible. Tell me about stifled. All the bits that should move can't move. It's inflamed. It stops you moving. I feel smothered and stifled and numb. So again, this issue of numbness you'll see in many of the hydrocarbons. I used to get it in my teeth and in my sinuses, and I would get abscesses in my root canal. Perhaps I needed something to drain it away. Tell me more about smothered and stifled. It's hanging onto the joint. I want to physically disperse it. I feel old. I'm claustrophobic. I'm closed in. It is like there is a thin cloth over my head. Yeah? So those as-if phrases can be really important when you're using sensation method to try and get deeper, because that as-if is moving into the delusional realm and then hopefully into the realm of sensation. What is this thin cloth? No control. I don't like things too close to me. I don't have any space. I go into a panic. I need to breathe. I need freedom. I do not like to be out of control. I'm a control freak. So this is the commonest phrase I hear in my cancer clinic, yeah? And what do we try and do with cancer? We try and control it. So these themes of the cancer miasm of control, perfection, overstretching, yeah, these are all really important. And Alice showed me a lovely cartoon yesterday that I don't know whether a friend had sent to you, but where it said, I know you're not Superwoman, but just to say I've never been in the room where you and Superwoman are in the room together. So a lovely case of lac maternum. She described rushing around a festival and someone actually shouted over to her, Superwoman. And of course, they meant it as a compliment. She, who had cancer of the salivary gland, thought, I'm going in the wrong direction again. I'm moving into my superwoman, superhuman realm. Yeah? So again, helping people just to back off their feelings of having to do so much and be responsible. So here she says, something is getting to me where I have no say, my influence in the world, my destiny. I feel responsible. The values and standards are for myself. It's a bit like this illness which is controlling me. Always very interesting when someone comes back to their primary condition in this moment, because then you start to see things coming together. It's what Rajan talks about, where local goes to global. Yeah? So here we've got the local complaint of her joints, stifling, smothering, suffocating her, controlling her. And then she says, hang on a bit, this is just like the cancer controlling me. And hang on a minute, this is me. I'm a control freak. I'm controlling something. It has taken over my body and I can't control it. You should be able to control it, but it's an invasion. It takes over my body and my mind. It knows it wants to grow, and I'm constantly having to bottle it. It's horrible and overwhelming. What is the invasion? I have a right to my space. It's invading my personal space. What is the experience when your space is invaded? It's a shock reaction. I am hemmed in, claustrophobic. I have got to have air and space. It's a panic. It's like this cloth over me, closed on me. The tunnel is getting smaller, a fine cloth stopping the air that I breathe. The finest cloth, like a muslin, cutting off what I need, this air, this space, cutting off my life, a smothering feeling, losing control. Yeah? So describe the fatigue to me. It is a drunk feeling. Unusual thing to say. The inflammation is everywhere. It's heavy. It is like the inflammation is settling in my head. So you see again, settling in the joint, settling in the head. It's as if I were to move, I would leave my head behind. It's heavy as if sediment. Describe sediment. Heavy, sludgy, stagnant. I only feel it when the cancer comes back, and then it triggers in my mind. It's invading my body. It feels the cancer's wearing me down, sapping my energy, dulling my senses. All over me, I have a distant feeling. If I pinch myself, I would feel dull and distant, as if I'm not connecting with reality. So again, this is the theme of the anesthetic agent. Just stay with it more. The cancer's doing it, shutting my body down so that I don't feel anything, so I don't have to deal with anything. It's taking over my body out of control. Just come back to the stagnant, the sediment. It's heavy and cloudy, lighter at the top, heavier at the bottom, like sludge at the bottom. It needs something hard to move it. The sediment doesn't flow easily. It needs force to move it. It wouldn't flow naturally. It's like a cavity. The body's a cavity that fills with heaviness. Describe this. It's like a pipe or a tunnel. The cavity is half the size of the pipe, and it's heavy at the bottom, flowing at the top. I can flow over the edge, but at the bottom, I need force. At the top, it will spill over. So just take 1 minute together to work out what remedy you think that could be. Just talk to each other for 1 minute. It's going to be tricky for me to stop exactly 5 minutes before. I might have to stick to 3 minutes.
Yeah, 1 or 2 questions. What was it, 3 as well?
Yeah.
And just 1 question to speak to at coffee, yeah?
Okay, everyone, we don't have that long, but just a few thoughts. Anyone want to shout out? Or if they're not sure what, then what do they think it sounds like or could be? And the fact that I'm doing a hydrocarbon talk's a bit of a giveaway. So no pulsatillas, please. And any thoughts? Crude oil. Who said that? Yeah, crude oil. Yeah. So crude oil, benzene, petroleum. We'll have a look at that as a relative. There does seem to be. We're very close here, but any other thoughts? Yes. Yeah, and in fact, what we've got here are kind of 2 elements. We've got the benzene, which is the crude oil, but there's also an element here that is gaseous, isn't it? That is kind of spilling over.
The atmosphere around cracking. The atmosphere that's going to go up around fracking.
Fracking is a big theme. Yeah, a big theme in this whole kind of group. But what I gave her was benzene nitricum, because I thought this really does look kind of like crude oil, but with more nitrogen in it, because it's so suffocative. Do you agree? Yeah? And it was very, very interesting. I wanted a petroleum-like substance with plenty of nitrogen. I looked up in the book, saw there was benzene nitricum, benzene dinitricum. And I gave her 30C. Now, remember at that point, I've been looking after her for 3 years, and her cancers recurred 3 times, each time with the C-reactive protein going up, joint pains. So with the benzene nitricum, she starts to really feel good. Yeah? The colonoscopy and endoscopy were normal. They aspirated the bowel to see if it grew bugs. The problem is she's got bacterial overgrowth because she had section of the bowel removed because the cancer had spread to the peritoneum. I do have some inflammation in the rectal stump and my bowel's not working, but the CRP and ESR has come right down. And what about the joint pain? It's much better. And then she says to me, by the way, I've got eczema that's come up on my head that I haven't had since I was a little girl, treated with steroids. Shall I just pop some steroid on it? Now, this can be really tricky because people don't like irritating, itchy things. But do remember that, you know, graphite and calc carb, we know these wonderful skin remedies, but also think of hydrocarbon. But also that sensitivity when we're putting a lot of petroleum-like drugs on the skin, yeah? And we're going to have a quick look at just how carcinogenic a lot of those are. So benzene nitricum or nitrobenzene derived from benzenum, and again, dyes, explosives, has this keynote of this sinking sensation as if the bed is sinking. So if someone does say that to you, you might like to think about that. And we've got nitrogen and oxygen, so we've got two gas elements there that might you know, contribute to this incredible sense of suffocation that she had. But just look at benzene as a carcinogen, yeah? And any of those cancers, you might want to think about it. I'm considering benzene in a lady who did a lot of photographic work and, again, was using chemicals. I know you can't see that, but what I wanted to just point out is when you put in cancerous affections into generalities, so just generalities, cancerous affections, that's how many hydrocarbons, when you put a hydrocarbon filter, are there for cancerous affections. Very interesting that Grimmer, if you're working in the cancer field, do read Grimmer. But out of his fairly short list of cancer remedies, there are 5 there. There's kerosene, there's methylenum, there's picric acid, which is another of the explosive hydrocarbons. And this was interesting when I looked at Roger Morrison's case of benzene nitricum, because he describes, I couldn't live the life I wanted to live. I was controlled by my father. He hogged all the space. So you heard her saying this about the space. I felt closed down, wanted to burst out. And this bursting out, very characteristic of nitrate. So you saw in glonoin again with a nitrate element, this bursting out. I hold on to the last thing so it's not all stolen or ripped off. I want to burst out to escape. Got 6 minutes, 5 minutes left? Yeah, 3 minutes, okay. So we've talked about the explosives, yeah? And I won't go into detail, but I just wanted to point out that this benzene petroleum has again this theme. If you take a bird and put a mesh on top of it, and now tell it to fly away, it will flutter, but not be able to fly. So this case from Sudhir Baldota, again, kind of, you'll get confused, but this is, again, a theme of being trapped under pressure. Now, I haven't got time to go through this in great detail, so I won't. I will stop in 3 minutes. But I just want to say that so much of my work is about helping people with the side effects of cancer treatments, and my research has been in this area as well. And I saw a lot of women with breast cancer on tamoxifen or Arimidex. And this was a lady who, she said to me, I didn't want to come, and I don't think it'll work. Which is a great way to start. But she said, the oncologist told me once to go and see you. Then they told me twice. And when they told me the 3rd time, and it was a lady who told me, I decided to come. And this is quite a short case. And she again describes these flushes, horrid, short-tempered, building up, building up. I don't want to speak to anyone. And describe it more. It would burst, go whoomph, I gradually relax, but it is as if my brain is getting hot. So what remedy do you think this could be? Very well-known remedy for hot flushes. Amyl nitrate, yeah. So once I understood, because I remember Dr. Clover talking about amyl nitrate as one of her key remedies for the menopause in general, but also for hot flushes. And this is sister to glonoine. This is used as a recreational drug, yeah, to improve orgasm, to take people out of their minds into the hinterlands, yeah? And in row 2, remember this moving between worlds, you're going to see this quality of being able to escape, yeah, or move away from. So again, amyl nitrate is a really interesting remedy for sudden dilatation, yeah, and when those flushes are very intense. And she described it just like a chimney. So it's like a chimney on my head, and it's like the chimney is just, yeah. So sometimes you can just make a fairly quick decision around what somebody needs. But these group of remedies are incredibly helpful. And if you get the chance, you know, have a look at the explosive ones, benzene, nitrogum, dinitrogum, picric acid, glonoine, amyl nitrate, get a kind of a handle on those. Don't forget things like paraffin, which are the very opposite, you know, no reaction, passivity. They're a long aliphatic chain, constipation. So we use paraffin, you know, to aid constipation. So I'm going to stop at this point. So we've just got 3 minutes of